Hi, welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I set out 6 tactics to help you deliver your best performance when doing intervals. I briefly touched on ERG mode and how it can impact your ability to control the effort in order to complete your session to the best of your ability. In this video, I'll get into my thoughts on ERG mode and specifically the pros and cons of using it and when it might be time to switch it off to ensure you are race ready. Okay, so what is ERG? I think it's universally understood as the mode that you have on a smart trainer, which automatically adjusts resistance to hold you at a specific power target, regardless of your cadence. It's therefore quite a handy tool if you're doing specific cadence work, like high torque, low cadence, and similarly the high cadence stuff, where you want the power to be held at a certain range. It's also pretty helpful if you want to be super accurate with more structured sessions. So as an example, you want to do efforts just below your anaerobic threshold to help build that ability to produce and then shuttle lactate without going too far into the red and then just spiking levels uncontrollably. The same could be said for lower intensity days when you just want to sit in zone 2 and don't want to think about having to change gear or your pedaling dynamics. The way I like to frame ERG is that it helps with control when you're looking to develop a specific area of fitness, be that cycling specific leg strength with the high torque work, or your VO2 max where we're being held at a power well above our anaerobic threshold. And really what we're trying to do there is just improve the cardiorespiratory system, the heart and lungs. We're not too worried about the muscular and the kind of neurological aspect of the training. Okay, so with that, let's just run through what I think the pros are. So number one, I think it's all about precision and adherence to specific workouts. So ERG mode ensures you complete the exact workout as prescribed. If the intervals call for 300 watts, then essentially you're just going to do the 300 watts. This eliminates the common tendency to drift in power output due to fatigue or loss of concentration or varying terrain if you was doing them outside. The benefit really is that, for certain types of training, like VO2 max intervals or threshold work, we're spending the correct amount of time in a specific physiological zone. And we're effectively training, an energy system for those key adaptations. So I think in a 2019 review in the International Journal of Sport and Physiology and Performance, they emphasise the importance of training stimulus quantification, and I think they found that ERG mode obviously helps provide that perfectly. Okay, so the second benefit is, and this can be both a benefit and a drawback if you like, is the neuromuscular patterning and efficiency effect of using ERG. So from a kind of pro perspective, it kind of forces you to maintain a certain power target, and it can therefore ingrain a specific neuromuscular firing pattern. So your brain and muscles learn precisely what it feels like to hold, for example, your threshold power. And obviously this can then lead to an improved pedaling efficiency and a better feel for different power outputs. And then that can potentially translate to a more consistent power out on the road. Number 3, I think ERG is ideal for highly structured interval work. So for workouts with very specific power targets and short rest periods, such as 30-30s or 40-20s, ERG is extremely effective here. It allows you to focus entirely on your cadence and form without the cognitive load of constantly monitoring and adjusting your power. You can achieve therefore higher quality of work in these high intensity sessions, leading to greater improvements in anaerobic capacity and maximal power. So number 4, mental focus and fatigue management. So by this I am referring to the removing of the need to chase a certain power number. Obviously, ERG holds you at a power, so you can direct your mental energy elsewhere, such as maintaining good form, breathing rhythm, cadence, and then just pushing through the discomfort of the effort. This can make challenging workouts more mentally manageable and can help you complete sessions you might otherwise abandon outdoors, or if you was not using ERG on a trainer, due to those constant, micro adjustments that are often required. Okay, so those are some of the benefits to using ERG mode, and I'm sure there's a few more, but what I would say is that I do think people place an over-reliance of using it on all of their indoor sessions, and this is where it can get problematic when it comes to actually riding or racing out on the road. Even just doing most of your training on the turbo and not using ERG mode can have similar consequences. I know this firsthand from my own experiences, that if I do too much training on the turbo, I'll get good at riding on the turbo, but then that doesn't always translate well to riding out on the road, especially if it's highly variable terrain and, in the dynamic situation of racing, the power, it's either all or nothing sometimes, and you just can't replicate that on the trainer, even in, a Zwift race. So I think the key is it just lacks that real world specificity. Okay, so what are the cons and drawbacks of using ERG? Number one, lack of real world simulation, as I just alluded to. Outdoor cycling requires constant micro adjustments in power. You surge out of corners, change pace in a group, and adjust to gradients and wind. And in a 2017 study in the Journal of Science and Cycling, they noted that variable power cycling elicits very different physiological and perceptual responses compared to constant power cycling. So the drawback being, when you rely solely on ERG mode, it can leave you poorly prepared for the dynamic power demands of real racing and group riding, and your ability to make sudden, sharp accelerations, which is, a key racing skill, may not be trained effectively. Number two, negative impact on pedaling dynamics and cadence. So this is the converse of the benefit that was in the pro in the neuromuscular patterning and efficiency. So this is the other side of the coin. And when you're in ERG mode, if your cadence drops, the trainer basically just increases that resistance to maintain the power. And then what you end up is in this vicious cycle of effectively stomping on the pedals at a very low cadence and eventually grinding to a halt. And I see this, all the time in my coaching, is that people will maintain the power, but at a cadence that they would never ever ride at outside on the road. And therefore you end up, like I said, ingraining quite bad habits if you're doing it all the time. It's different if it's a specific talk session where you're trying to work the muscles, but if you're doing that all the time, you can end up with serious muscle fatigue. And in a study in the European Journal of Applied Physiology, they showed that a self-selected cadence versus an imposed cadence can affect metabolic cost and muscle activation patterns. So the drawback really is that it teaches bad habits. Riders may not learn to intuitively shift gears to maintain that optimal cadence. It can also be unforgiving, as a small dip in cadence can feel like you're hitting a wall rather than that cue to shift down to an easier gear. Number three. So this is it's not a repetition of number one, but it is, a reduced race readiness. And this is the real big one, I think, in that you're training your muscles in a way that when you come to ride on the road, your brain is not prepared for. And I always say this, that, when you're training, you're not just training your muscles, but you're training your brain as well. And the skill of managing fatigue while responding to attacks and changes in pace is a cognitive one. And ERG mode doesn't really develop that. doesn't develop that tactical feel of when to push and when to recover within that dynamic environment. So a rider who only trains in ERG mode might have a high FTP, but could be tactically inept and struggle with the surging nature of a real race or fast group ride. Number 4, ERG mode just fails or isn't very good on your particular trainer. So some trainers are better at holding the power that's needed for a particular session, but I think most users will have experienced at some point where the trainer just fails to adjust correctly to the power that you want. It's either spiking resistance uncontrollably or just dropping it entirely, so you just end up spinning out, and often it's at the worst possible moment. So yeah, I think ERG mode can then potentially ruin the key workout, and it is it's a technical limitation of using ERG mode all the time. Number 5, I think it places a potential artificial limit on what is possible. By that I mean you risk never exploring your limits, as ERG can end up being a safety net and creating an artificial ceiling. As you gain fitness, you either fail to recognise that, or you don't do sufficient testing to change your training levels, and then you just end up plateauing. So in my own coaching, I do try and encourage riders to vary the use of ERG, both from session to session and also within sessions. So you might start a particular workout with ERG on, and then if you feel good, switch it off and then try to push on a little more and see if you can deliver slightly more power, especially if you've been consistently hitting your numbers in previous sessions, as that's usually an indication that you've now adapted to the training stimulus and it's time to kind of try and move on. Okay, so what's the verdict then? For me, I think ERG is a tool and not a panacea. The consensus amongst coaches and sports scientists is pretty clear, and ERG mode is an incredibly powerful tool, but it should not be the only tool in your toolbox. I would look at it from both a session perspective, so for specific sessions, particularly during the off season when you're not racing, it can be quite helpful for working on things like building your FTP, certain VO2 max sessions, and even maybe the odd sprint session where you're trying to, I guess, look at holding specific power targets. It can also be helpful for benchmark testing and performing, ramp tests or other FTP type fitness tests. And it can also be really helpful when you're focusing on another aspect of your cycling, such as your cadence, and your just general form on the bike, and your, like things like your pedal stroke, and then you don't really have to worry too much about, the power that you're putting out. As you come out of the off season though, I think that's when you kind of need to start thinking about switching ERG mode off. As you approach key races or the start of your racing season, you want your riding of the bike to effectively become quite specific to how it will be during the races. And this is where you either need to switch ERG mode off or just get off the trainer entirely and get out on the road. And I think that's generally what, most people do. But I think even if you don't get out on the road, you need to then start thinking about switching it off, as I say, and trying to use your gears and cadence to dictate the power rather than letting the trainer dictate it to you. So to conclude, I think to maximize your cycling fitness, you can use ERG mode for what it's best at. So that's executing specific high intensity interval sessions with, quite a lot of precision. However, to become a well-rounded race-ready cyclist, you must also really spend a significant amount of time either in, I don't know whether you call it sim mode or outdoor mode. So you're effectively used to dealing with those variable power demands that mimic real-world riding. So as ever, it's, a blended approach will yield the best overall results.